so excited to have my friend Steve Leavitt with me today, and I'll introduce him formally in a second. But Steve, we go way back, don't we?
We do go way back. We're old buddies, and I'm
Oh,
so honored to get to be here.
well, it's so much fun for me. Steve and I had opportunity to interview him several occasions when I was host at Point of View Radio,
Yep.
and then as the Lord would have it, our paths crossed again in San Antonio. We attended the same church there, and it was just such a joy for me to run into Steve again, and then of course now he's off to Colorado, but this is going to be
Yes,
fun
ma'am.
for us. Old home week here. So
That's right.
again, welcome to all of you to Grace Cafe. You know, we're going to be talking today about strong marriages and families, which is only made possible by God's grace. And Steve is going to guide us through this conversation. You're going to be so blessed. Steve Levitt is a Christian biblical counselor, ordained minister, and clinical director with Rock Your Family, a ministry in Colorado that focuses on helping individuals and families to make necessary changes to reconnect with God and with one another. Steve has his master's in biblical counseling from Dallas Theological Seminary. He's helped many in his 25 years of counseling. He has published teaching materials on the subjects of marriage, family, parenting, along with biblical solutions to issues of depression, anxiety, fear, worry, obsessive compulsion. Now, are you sensing that you're going to need to listen to this man today just for those issues? He is a highly sought out speaker. He's spoken to thousands in church training seminars. Steve lost his first wife to cancer in 1997, but he's been happily remarried for 20 years to his wife, Marty. Sharing a heart for missions, the couple has spent time in Kenya, Africa, working with orphans and homeless widows and training pastors. Steve and Marty have 4 children and live in Colorado. So, welcome, Steve.
I feel welcomed. I love it. I love being here so much. Colorado is not just. I had somebody explain to me the other day, Carmen, why Colorado works for people so
Uh-huh.
much. There's
Yeah.
this thin space that happens for me here between God and I, and it's just beautiful. I love
Mm,
being up here and Rock Your Family Counseling Center. I'm just
mm.
honored to be up here, and I love the opportunity to get to hang out with you for a while. You've been a blessing to so many people for so long. I'm super blessed to get to be on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much. Well, let's start with, you got into counseling. God has so transformed your life. But
Right?
it started with some own issues that you had back after losing your wife. Do you mind just sharing so our listeners know that you've been perhaps where they are?
Yeah, yeah. Man, my story is so big and wide. I got to be careful not to go on and on. But I was raised just a country kid out on a really remote farm and up in the panhandle of Texas. But I ended up at Denton, going to school up Denton, Texas, going to school up there with Tommy Nelson and Denton Bible Church, and growing in the Lord and learning tons about marriages whenever he had taken off with the Song of Solomon and doing all that other stuff. And I was just learning tons, got married, and was kind of taken off in ministry. And my wife was diagnosed with cancer. And, I wish that story ended the way I wanted it to end, but the Lord took her home. And I was left with a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old child after she was gone. And, I was managing okay, and I thought I was doing pretty well. But I didn't know it at the time, Carmen. I didn't know what it was. But I began to have panic attacks. I would lay in bed shaking at night. Uh, my heart would race. My stomach would hurt. My chest would get tight. Uh,
Mm,
Always with shakiness and all the symptoms of anxiety. I didn't know what it was, Carmen. I thought I was dying. I literally
mm.
just
Can
thought I was
imagine.
dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured out that I had to figure out what was wrong really quick. And I finally, after about a year or so, figured out that we call this anxiety. And I'd had it my whole life. It had gotten unmanageable obviously after the trauma of losing my wife, and I had to face it. And I began
Yes.
studying why my body is doing what it's doing, why my mind is doing what it's doing, and how do you fix that. And for 20 something years now, I've written a book on it. I speak all over on it. People have me come talk on it. I've become an expert in this area of
Mm-hmm.
how to spiritually, medically, environmentally, stress-wise, what to do with this, um, to move past it, basically, how to heal
Mm-hmm.
from it. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, all the while, I do marriage seminars, and I do
Yes.
a ton of marriage counseling. I do all that stuff, but that's what has brought me to this kind of older place than I really am kind of thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
hopefully I can offer other people some help.
Oh, and you have over and over and over again. Well, when we think about wanting, desiring strong families and desiring families where our children love the Lord and want to serve Him and all of those things, today we almost think that's pie in the sky because of all the issues that we deal with, particularly here in America, where we are so blessed and take many of those blessings
Right.
for granted. So, how do you've talked about counseling young couples and families, and I know you've done individuals, blended families because you've experienced that, families with adopted
Nice.
children because you've
Yep.
experienced that personally. So, uh, what do we do with emotions that we bring into a relationship, particularly, I think, anger and bitterness? Steve, what do we do with that so that it doesn't harm our family?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Carmen, a lot of people don't do anything with it. They get married and they think that they get to get in the Winnebago and head down the road and put it on cruise
Hmm.
control and go to the back and make a sandwich. That's
Yeah.
what people think they can do in marriage, when in fact you have to be intentional about that baggage, those things you bring into marriage, the
Hmm.
difficulties, the personalities, the brokenness, the hurts, um, the family dynamics, how you were raised. You have to be intentional about how those are going to mesh together in marriage.
Hmm.
Otherwise, the Winnebago drives off the road really quick and it crashes, and that's why we have almost a 50% divorce rate. People
Yes.
just aren't intentional about how do we make this work well
Hmm.
together. I
And do
guess
you
to go a
think?
little deeper and
Yeah.
actually answer that question, um, when you get married, you first have to realize you're marrying a broken person. You're
Mm.
marrying people during engagement and dating. The endorphins are flowing, the infatuation's flowing. You don't really know who you're marrying,
Mm. Yeah.
completely. You,
Yeah.
you can't tell what they're going to be like 5 years into marriage. Whenever the
Hmm.
endorphins wear off and the honeymoon's over, they're going to be a different person. And so it's then that you have to decide, how do we come together in marriage to become one and really, really appreciate and love the broken parts? How do we lean into the broken parts of our spouse instead of run from
Absolutely.
them or fight them?
I think about, like you say, we all have baggage we bring to a marriage. And like when you're dating, when you're in that, even a courtship, you're not wanting to talk about the ugly stuff because you don't want to scare them off, right? But
Right.
only if we would, so that those things could be resolved early on. But I think what happens is, Steve, once that the marriage happens, then all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't want to bring it up now. I don't want to cause conflict now. But in fact, that would be the healthiest thing to do. Correct. If people would just talk about where they've been and the baggage that they brought to the marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I won't marry somebody that won't do 6 or 7 sessions of premarital counseling with me. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because if I can get you for premarital counseling, I'll almost break you up, because I'm going to bring all that stuff out and force
Yes.
you to know
Yeah.
who you're marrying before you marry
Uh-huh.
them. And
Oh,
and and oh, it's so beneficial for a couple to go into marriage knowing and having the right expectations.
yes.
Just knowing
Yes.
who it is you're
Mhm.
marrying.
Mhm.
We love the infatuation part of marriage. We love the fun. I had a couple sitting on this couch behind me this morning talking about
Mhm.
how he romanced me and he used to talk to me for hours and he would clean my apartment while I was gone and he won't do it anymore and she was so affectionate and she used to love to kiss and all these other things and not anymore you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
because infatuation drives all those things. Well,
Mhm.
5 years into marriage, now it has to be intentional. You have to be
Yes.
purposeful and intentional about doing those things.
Mhm. It really is about give, more than it's about take. Isn't it?
Amen, sister. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is. Look, I have 13 rules of marriage that I teach at my seminars and things like that. And the number one rule is that you have to learn to put your spouse's needs above your own.
Mhm.
And that comes from Ephesians 5, to love your
Mm.
spouse the way Christ loved the church. But until you're ready to put your spouse's needs above your own, you won't have
Mhm.
successful marriage. You just
Mm.
can't,
Yes. Yes. I
for sure.
remember in talking about blended families, my husband and I had experienced a blended family when we married,
Right?
and oftentimes, again, because we hadn't talked about, well, how do you discipline your children? Well, how do you, reward your children? How do you? We hadn't discussed all that ahead of time. We thought, we'll work it out after we're married. So when those issues arose, there were issues because I wouldn't discipline the
Yep.
way he disciplined, right? And so I assumed that my husband was wrong because he needed to put things my way in handling these issues. But
Yep.
I ended up embarrassing myself, Steve, because I actually invited the one of the elders from our church to come and straighten my husband out. And he came and and what he said was, and it was life changing for our marriage. He said, Carmen, you are married now, and yes, you still love your children with all your heart. However, your husband comes first. Your husband comes first. You put him first, and then the relationship with the children will work out. And I appreciated hearing that because blended families can be difficult if we have our priorities out of order.
So the divorce rate's about 75% in blended family situations.
Wow.
It's three
Wow.
out of four. And this is exactly the reason why. What you just described is the exact reason why. Here's how I describe this, Carmen, and I think you'll appreciate it. Um, so you get married to this man who Scripture tells you to prioritize. He comes first. But you've only known him and loved him a little while. You gave birth to those kids. You've loved them
Right.
your whole life. You would die for them. It's in your instincts to protect and die for them. And yet
Yeah.
he comes first. That's a dichotomy that you can't even really resolve. So
Mm-hmm.
what you have to do is learn to love both of them differently, but in a way that satisfies both. And it's an
Mm-hmm.
incredibly difficult thing to do. Carmen, and I've watched you and your husband. I know how you are with each other. Y'all have a really sweet, loving, kind marriage.
Yeah.
Y'all are beautiful together.
Oh,
I've
thank you.
secretly
Thank you.
watched you guys, and y'all do very well together. And y'all have
Uh,
figured this out. This thing I'm talking about, you figured it
uh,
out.
we figured it out. And I tell you, and it's God's grace, and which is kind of the foundation of all we're talking about today, Steve. Without God's grace, all of our relationships would be impossible, wouldn't they?
Well, how do we give grace to anybody else if we don't embrace God's grace for us, right?
Oh, good.
And
Yes.
you can't
Yes.
have successful marriage without being graceful with your mate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the
Absolutely.
idea of leaning into a broken person, it goes against our flesh. It goes
Mm.
against the way we're designed, or not the way we're designed, the way our flesh screams at us. So um, the idea of mercy and grace is the foundation of this thing that God asked us to do in marriage. It's just,
Yes.
we
Yes.
have to, but it comes from first accepting God's grace for us.
Uh-huh. Well, Steve, you mentioned you have several principles for marriage. Share a couple more, and then we'll encourage folks to get your materials so they can learn all of them.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and it's another reason I love Colorado is we do marriage retreats up here, and we do outdoor therapy too. We don't just stay in the counseling office. We go out and do ropes courses and climb mountains and hike
Oh,
lakes and do therapy in the midst of all that. So we do a
of
lot of
course.
cool stuff. So people come up here and come to our retreats all the time. Shameless promotion, but just so people know, it's Rock Your
Oh, it's
Family.
good.
Rockyourfamily.org is the
Yes.
website there. But all right, so a bunch of the fundamentals are, like I said, putting your spouse's needs above your own. You just have to do that. Losing the battle to win the war,
Oh, yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
got to lose the
Yeah.
battle to win the war. Validating your spouse's feelings.
Oh,
Learning to
yes.
validate your spouse's feelings.
Mm.
Um, so often the couple sitting in my office, and what the fundamental broken part of their marriage is that they're giving information, justification, and explanation every time their spouse shares a concern with them. And none of those
Oh,
work. What they're wanting is
no.
validation. So no
Yes.
more
Yes.
information, justification, or explanation. Just give
Mm-hmm.
validation. You don't have to agree with them, but validate how they feel.
Mm.
Validate their concerns. Give worth and meaning and value to what they're feeling. I also believe that, God has to be at the center of the marriage in
Amen.
order for a marriage to be successful. You have to be
Amen.
forgiving for marriage to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be sunshine for your mate instead of a dark cloud
Mm.
for your
Mm.
marriage to be successful. Um,
Amen.
Man, I could go on and on. The list goes on
Those
and
are
on,
all
but
great.
those are kind
Yeah.
of the basic things that
Yeah.
marriages have to experience.
No doubt about it. And I do
Yeah,
encourage our folks to visit your website, rockyourfamily.org, and learn more about the resources that Steve makes available because they will help your family. Well, Steve,
yeah,
those of us who have children, now mine are grown, now I'm in the grandparent stage, which is
right.
wonderful. But, I remember when our kids were still at home, it was a struggle to keep our kids on our team, to keep our kids wanting to be a part of family activities, wanting to go to church, wanting to have a meal together. What advice do you give families who might be struggling with that same issue?
Well, the analysis is super easy. The advice is the hard part. Look, back before cell phones, everybody's going to amen this, but back before cell phones, what you and I did, Carmen, is we got up in the morning, we had breakfast with our family, we hung out with our family, then we went to school. We went to school, and that was our social time. That was our
Yes.
friend time. We disconnected from our family. We went to school, and we connected with our friends. And then when that bell rang at 4 o'clock or whatever, we disconnected with our friends, and we went home and reconnected with family, and and had family dinners and had family. I'd go home and drive the tractor with my dad, and I'd go home. We'd work the cows and do work on the farm. Um, Today's kids wake up, they look at their phone, they text whoever texts them overnight, and they immediately connect with the outside world. They go grab something to eat and go to school. They leave school, they come home, and they never disconnect from their friends, their social life.
Yes.
So they
Yes.
never connect to family. We've lost the loyalty to family in our country because of social media,
Yes.
texting and
Yes.
social media. And so I know the solution lies in there somewhere. I'm
Mm.
not quite sure how to win it, but I know the solution has to do with helping our kids disconnect from their social life and connect to their family. They're not doing that anymore. I
No.
suggest families to have a technology basket. to where they have to drop their phone in that basket at some point and leave it there and just be involved with the family without any connection to the social life or worried about who's texting them or what somebody said about them on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And I use social media just like we're doing right here all the time. It's a beautiful avenue, but it's so dangerous for our children. And one last thing, Carmen. It's so much easier to say no to your children than to say no, not anymore. In other words, if you give that to them, it's so hard to take it back. It's easier to never have given it to them.
Yes, yes.
So really make sure your kid is telling you all the time, but all my other friends have Instagram. Great. That means I'm doing the right thing that you don't have it yet. Right?
Exactly.
And by the way, what I told my kids all the time is, by the way, doesn't Scripture say we're supposed to be a light in a dark world? So we're supposed to be different than all the other kids. You're supposed to be different.
Yes.
So be different.
Absolutely. And all of that being said, as valuable as social media is for what we do as adults, we can set the example at home. We can set that example right and be the one to put our phone in
Carmen,
the basket.
Don't. Now, you've gone too far, Carmen. You're so right.
I know. And it's so hard. Right. So we have to discipline ourselves in that if we want our kids to even think about following the right path. But so Steve, and I know again your family. I enjoy watching your family on your Facebook page and seeing how you do spend time with your kids. How do you help grow their desire to know God, to love God? How do you grow that? You know, my husband and I were talking the other day. So many times we've talked about, do you make your children go to church? It's like, well, you go to church, or, you know, you can't do this, this, and this. Well, that's one way to do it. But are they then going to walk away from church once they're out of the house? So how do you instill that love for the Lord?
Yeah, so I got to preempt this by saying that I don't know exactly what all I've done right, but my kids all walk with the Lord. They love the Lord. They love ministry. They all are going to do ministry in some element. And I wasn't that parent that really forced religion. I didn't force church. I didn't force. I suggested but I honestly believe if you ask my kids that question, they would say they watched Marty and I live it out. They just watched us live it out a lot. They watched us make mistakes, and they watched us love God, and that gave them a love for God. Now, speaking to the men out there for just a second, though, Carmen, I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I also would get up and have a quiet time in my Bible, and I would leave it open on the counter. So everybody saw that Daddy spent time in the Word this morning. As technology came along, and I even have quiet time on my phone sometimes. I read the Bible on my phone. Every morning I text my family whatever verse God's working on me that day. So my kids get a verse from me every morning. I don't expect them for that verse to bow them over. What I do want them to know is Daddy spent time in the Word this morning. Amen. And he sent me a verse to tell me what God's doing in his life. And that inspires them to spend time in the Word. So my kids all want to spend time in the Word and do well. So that's the best advice I think I can give is just living it out.
Living it out, letting them see that it's important to you, it's a priority for you. And I tell you what, as a woman, getting back to marriages, it's one of the things that drew me to my husband as far as respecting him, feeling safe and secure with him, because I saw him seek the Lord regularly. And still to this day, he leads in that. No matter what time he gets up in the morning, he's sitting here reading the Word. And so
Praise
when
God.
he leaves, because he travels a lot, it's like I feel so secure just knowing, well, my husband has sought the Lord, and so he'll have the protection of the Lord. He's less likely to be tempted and drawn away. It's a beautiful thing. And I think you're right. I think our kids also want to have that feeling of security. My dad, my mom seek the Lord, and he is our strength. He is our strength.
Interesting thought there. Whenever I counsel women who come in who are married, and I'm counseling them alone,
Yeah.
and their husbands aren't saved, or they're not leading. Whenever
Mm-hmm.
I close in prayer, Carmen,
Mm.
almost every time that I'll close that counseling session in prayer, and I'm praying for that person and being compassionate and merciful,
Mm-hmm.
whenever I end that prayer and I look up, that woman is almost always crying,
Oh,
almost every
wow.
time, because a
Mm.
man of God has spread his umbrella of of prayer over them. And my
Yeah.
wife used to cry when I would pray together with her. There's
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
about that, man. If you'll step up and pray with your wife,
Yes.
pray with your kids, there's something about that that feels like a blanket of covering over them,
No
like
doubt
you just
about it.
described.
I think the Holy Spirit just intervenes there and makes sure that his
Mm.
presence is felt, and it stays with you. It stays with you.
It is the
Well,
hardest thing I do, by the way, as a leader
yeah,
in my home.
yeah.
I don't do it well.
Oh, well,
I
and Bob
try.
has mentioned that, we pray
It's hard.
together, but he mentioned that was one of the hardest things for him to start doing, was
Yes.
to pray.
Yep.
But yet it certainly is a key, one of the
Yep.
keys to the success of our marriage, I know. Well, you talk about, and we'll close with this, but we talk about building a strong legacy, leaving a strong legacy. And of course,
Mhm.
one of the first point is putting God first. But let's talk about a couple of more of the things. And I don't know if does it come to mind to you immediately, or are you going, well, she should have
Oh
told me she
yeah,
would
I
talk about
do.
this.
I
Yeah,
do a talk
yeah.
called "Leaving a
Uh,
Legacy."
yeah, yeah. So talk about some of those points because I thought those were very, very good points. Putting God
Um, you know,
first.
yeah. Go ahead.
And, yeah,
Put God first.
and then that you can always be joyful. You can always be joyful. I thought that was great because you can. To be anxious, no more, and then be a giver and not a taker. Just touch on those as for our
Where did you
closing
even
today.
get those notes? I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
tell
That
you
is that
what,
published somewhere?
I tell you,
That's awesome.
I know how to find stuff on you, Steve Levitt.
You do your homework. Look, the main one on there to me is the
Uh,
sunshine, to be joyful.
mm,
Um, I want to be remembered as that guy that so was full of Christ that Christ's joy just bled out of me,
oh,
right?
yes,
That
yes.
people got around me and went, I want some of whatever it is you got. Whatever
Yeah.
you're selling, I want some. And
Uh-huh.
that looks like joy usually to most people. And so I think that's
I think
so
so
important
too.
to choose joy no matter what your circumstances are.
Yes,
That's
yes.
the one
Oh,
I would
yes.
camp on the most for people. Of course,
I
leaving a
love it.
legacy as a man of integrity or a woman of integrity, having
Mm-hmm.
character, but also a good question asker, someone who
Mm,
asks good questions and is
mm,
about other people and not about themselves.
mm,
That's the legacy
mm,
you want to leave, right?
mm. Yes, yes. No doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, tell us, and then in our closing moment, what can people get if they contact Rock Your Family? What are they going to learn? What do you offer, and how can they learn
Yeah,
more?
sure. Thank you, Carmen. Well, counseling, in-house counseling, to come in and get biblical counseling with me, we can sit all day long, or one of our other therapists too. But you can come up here and do a marriage intensive if you and your spouse want to just come and sit with me for 3, 5, 7 days. I'll
Mm,
counsel you for 3, 5, 7 days. And we call it a
wow.
marriage intensive. If you just want a little couple of day thing, we can do a marriage retreat, just the two of you, and we'll get out on the ropes course and do some cool, fun stuff like that. Um, the list goes on, but we also offer equine therapy. We offer all
Mm,
kinds of different experiential therapy. Uh,
yes.
but the main thing is deciding to do something.
Mm,
If your marriage is a little bit broken, stop waiting for it to get fixed. Do something about it. Go get some help.
Oh, good advice. Good advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Steve, for what you do, for using your gifts and talents for the Lord's good work. You are making a difference. Like I say, I just have such fond memories of other interviews I've done with you and this one
Yeah.
now as well. I so appreciate you. And goodness, maybe I should kind of start a little spat with Bob and say, hey, honey, we better go for some counseling. And I know right where to go.
Come up and
Go to
come up
Colorado.
and see me. It's a good excuse to come to Colorado, right?
Yeah, that's
Well,
right. It
thank you
would
for
be.
having me.
Well, thank you. And we'd love to have you back again. And so thanks so much for taking the time today, Steve.
Anytime.
All right. So
Anytime.
again, Steve's website, you'll want to check it out. It's rockyourfamily.org. So check it
That's right.
out and learn more. So thank you for joining us today and being a part of this conversation. Hope you'll share it with others who maybe have not had opportunity to listen to it, and especially those who are perhaps are needing some help in their marriage or in their family. They can learn about all the things that this ministry has to offer. So thank you. God bless. Next week we'll be back. We'll have Sean Carney with us next week. Be sure to join us. We're going to talk about how grace, love, and prayer is making a difference in the pro-life movement. You won't want to miss it. So we'll see you next week. Have a good one.